Hello students, in this video we will discuss part 2 of the summary of the essay Discourse of the Orient by Edward Said. In this part of the essay, Said tells us that Orient is not just an imagination. It's a real place with cultures, histories and customs that are real. Then he points out the relationship between Orient and Occident and tells us that it is a relationship of power and domination. Said brings in Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony. He also refers to Denis Hayes' idea of Europe and several other Orientalist works. Now let us look at the summary of the essay. Edward Said says that the Orient is not an inert fact of nature. It is not merely there, just as the Occident itself is not just there either. We must take seriously Vico's great observation that men make their own history, that what they can know is what they have made, and extend it to geography. Orient and Occident, according to Said, are man made. Therefore, as much as the West itself, the Orient is an idea that has a history and a tradition of thought, imagery, and vocabulary that have given it a reality and presence in and for the West. The two geographical entities thus support and to an extent reflect each other. Orient was not just an idea or a creation with no corresponding reality. When Disraeli said in his novel Tancred that the East was a career, he meant that to be interested in the East was something bright young Westerners would find to be an all consuming passion. He should not be interpreted as saying that the East was only a career for Westerners. There were and are cultures and nations whose location is in the East, and their lives, histories, and customs have a brute reality obviously greater than anything that could be said about them in the West. So he marks the area of study and says the phenomenon of Orientalism, as I study it here, deals principally not with the correspondence between Orientalism and Orient, but with the internal consistency of Orientalism and its ideas about the Orient, despite or beyond any correspondence or lack thereof with the real Orient. Then he says that the relationship between Orient and Occident is that of power. This is what we read in the essay. The relationship between Occident and Orient is a relationship of power, of domination, of varying degrees of a complex hegemony, and is quite accurately indicated in the title of K.M. Panikar's classic Asia and Western Dominance. The Orient was Orientalized not only because it was discovered to be Oriental in all those ways considered commonplace by an average 19th century European, but also because it could be, that is, submitted to being made Oriental. For this, he gives an example how Orient can be made submissive. He gives the example of Flaubert. Flaubert's encounter with an Egyptian courtesan produced a widely influential model of the Oriental woman. She never spoke of herself. She never represented her emotions, presence, or history. He spoke for and represented her. He was foreign, comparatively wealthy, male, and these were historical facts of domination that allowed him not only to possess Kuchukhanim physically but also to speak for her and tell his readers in what way she was typically Oriental. So here Said is referring to Flaubert's works where he talks about Kachak Hanim, who was an Egyptian dancer, and Flaubert is giving his perspective. We don't get anything where this lady Kuchak Hanim speaks about her feelings or emotions, presence or history. Everything about her is told by Gustave Flaubert. So it is because of his being male, wealthy, and also foreign that gives him the power to do so. That is what Said is pointing out here. He says, my argument is that Flaubert's situation of strength in relation to Kuchak Hanim was not an isolated instance. It fairly stands for the pattern of relative strength between East and West and the discourse about the Orient that it enabled. Why the West was able to create a discourse about the East or Orient was because the West had power and therefore it could propagate whatever it wanted. Then he talks about the structure of Orientalism. One ought never to assume that the structure of Orientalism is nothing more than a structure of lies, of myths, which were the truth about them to be told would simply blow away. Said believes that Orientalism is more particularly valuable as a sign of European Atlantic power over the Orient than it is as a veridic discourse about the Orient. Nevertheless, what we must respect and try to grasp is the sheer knitted together strength of Orientalist discourse, its very close ties to the enabling socio-economic and political institutions, and its redoubtable durability. After all, any system of ideas that can remain unchanged as teachable wisdom from the point of Ernest Renan in the late 1840s until the present in the United States must be something more formidable than a mere collection of lies. So, here Said points out that Orientalism is not just a bundle of lies, it has a theoretical background to it. Therefore, he says Orientalism, therefore, is not an airy European fantasy about the Orient, but a created body of theory and practice in which for many nations there has been a considerable material investment. Then he talks about Gramsci's idea of hegemony. Gramsci has made the useful analytic distinction between civil and political society, in which the former is made up of voluntary affiliations like schools, families, and unions. The latter, or the political society of state institutions, the army, police, and central bureaucracy, whose role in the polity is direct domination, culture, of course, is to be found operating within civil society, where the influence of ideas, of institutions, and of other persons works not through domination but by what Gramsci calls consent. In any society not totalitarian, then certain cultural forms predominate over others, just as certain ideas are more influential than others. The form of this cultural leadership is what Gramsci has identified as hegemony, an indispensable concept for the understanding of cultural life in the industrial West. It is hegemony, or rather, the result of cultural hegemony at work, that gives Orientalism the durability and strength. Edward Said says that Orientalism has been there from a long time, since 1840s to the earlier part of 20th century. Why it was long standing and it was so durable is due to the cultural hegemony which the West could exercise on the East. Then he talks about Denis Hayes' work, The Idea of Europe. Orientalism is never far from what Denis Hayes calls the idea of Europe, a collective notion identifying us Europeans as against those non Europeans. And indeed, it can be argued that all major component in European culture is precisely what made that culture hegemonic both in and outside Europe. The idea of European identity as a superior one in comparison with all the non European peoples and cultures. So, in Denis Hayes' work, Idea of Europe, he mainly talks about what were the elements that made Europe hegemonic over other non European cultures. There is, in addition, the hegemony of European ideas about the Orient themselves, reiterating European superiority over Oriental backwardness, usually overriding the possibility that a more independent or a more skeptical thinker might have had different views on the matter. Now, regarding Denis Hay, he was born on 29th August 1915. He was educated at Oxford and he became emerite professor of medieval history from 1945 onwards, and then became the vice principal of Edinburgh University. His passion for European history included the effects of Italian Renaissance and the Church on the 15th century Europe. Edinburgh University's Center for Medieval Renaissance Studies holds an annual Denis Hayes lecture. In the book Idea of Europe, Denis Hay traces the emergence of the term Europe itself. He brings us back to a time before Europe had evolved as a distinct entity, either culturally, politically, or geographically. His inquiry ranges from an ancient civilization to the modern Renaissance. His erudition in the realm of medieval history, lightly worn, he maps the evolution of European values and the consequences for the emergence of a European civilization. So, Said, after going through all these authors, he says Orientalism depends for its strategy on this flexible positional superiority, which puts the Westerner in a whole series of possible relationships with the Orient without ever losing them in a relative upper hand. The scientist, the scholar, the missionary, the trader, or the soldier was in or thought about the Orient because he could be there, or he could think about it with very little resistance on the Orient's part. Within the umbrella of Western hegemony over the Orient during the period from the end of 18th century, there emerged a complex Orient suitable for study in the academy, for display in the museum, for reconstruction in the colonial office, for theoretical illustration in anthropological, biological, linguistic, racial, and historical theses about mankind and the universe. For instances of economic and sociological theories of development, revolution, cultural personality, national or religious character. Additionally, the imaginative examination of things Oriental was based more or less exclusively upon a sovereign Western consciousness out of whose unchallenged centrality an Oriental world emerged. First, according to general ideas about who and what was an Oriental, then, according to detailed logic governed not simply by empirical reality but by a battery of desires, regressions, investments, and projections. If we can point to great Oriental works of genuine scholarship like Sylvester de Saussay's Chrismati Arabi, or William Lane's account of the manners and customs of modern Egyptians, we need also to note Renan's and Gobineau's racial ideas came out of the same impulse, as did many Victorian pornographic novels. Edward William Lane's An Account of Manners and Customs of the Modern Egyptians is one of the classics of Middle East studies. Its influence is difficult to overstate, for besides being a source for almost every aspect of 19th century Egyptian society, modern Egyptian is also widely used for contemporary, medieval, and even ancient Egypt, as well as for the entire Middle East. It has influenced major writers and visual artists such as Gustave Flaubert and J.F. Lewis. And he points out the names of other Orientalist works such as William Jones, Nerval, etc.